Hello and welcome to Better Offline. I am, of course, your host, Ed Zitron. I remain punished and hated forever. Better Offline. Today I'm joined by Mike Masnick. He's the CEO and founder of Techdirt, inventor of the Streisand effect, and now a board member of the social network Bluesky. Mike, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So let's start with the Streisand effect. Why don't you tell the story of how you coined that? Just walk us through that one. Because now that I've heard about it, it's all I can think about.
Yeah, I mean, there's two elements to the founding story. One of which is, what caused the term to be that, and then me eventually naming it. The first was just I was amazed by this story of Barbra Streisand suing this guy, I always forget his name, Ken something, who was doing this project. He was he had been a fairly successful tech guy, but he was very interested in conservation. And so he was like renting a helicopter every few months and flying along the west coast of the United States and taking a photograph every bit of the way. And his idea was to continue to do that every few years and track the erosion of the west coast of the United States.
Okay.
Yeah, kind of an interesting project. This is pre-Google Maps, pre-satellite, easy access to satellite imagery, all this kind of stuff. And he created this website, and it's still online, and it is incredibly old-fashioned, where you could go picture to picture. You couldn't, no map, like modern mapping software where you could slide along. You could go picture to picture along the way. And it had this ability for people to leave their own annotations. And somebody found Barbra Streisand's house in Malibu and commented on it that this is Barbra Streisand, the Streisand estate, I believe was the phrase that was put on it. And somebody, a Streisand lawyer, found it and threatened him and then sued him for this. And the story that caught my attention, at least, was that what came out in the court documents was before the lawsuit, that image had been viewed, I believe it was 8 times, 2 of which were from IP addresses associated with the law firm that was representing Barbra Streisand. So at most 6 people had seen the photo prior to this lawsuit. And in the immediate aftermath, hundreds of thousands of people saw the photo. And he eventually won the lawsuit. In fact, Streisand had to pay for his legal fees. And I had written about it at the time and just thought this was a crazy story. But I kept seeing other examples of that kind of thing where people would, try and get something taken down offline, and the end result would be way more attention paid to it. And so there was a story that actually happened, I think it was almost 2 years after the original Streisand lawsuit and everything, in which there was a site, which also might still be online and also might be very outdated, called urinal.net, which
It's where I get my posts.
Yes. Well, it's, this is the early internet where anyone would create anything online. Yeah. And they would post photos of urinals, and they were very specific and very clear, that urinals only, no people, no body parts, just urinals from around the world. And they had pages of different ones. And there was some hotel or something, or I can't remember. Somebody got very mad that a urinal from their property was shown and sent a legal threat letter. And so I wrote about that, and in doing so said, there should be a term for this situation where someone, where something is not getting attention and someone sends a takedown, and suddenly that draws all this attention to the thing that they wanted gone. And then I just jokingly said, why don't we call it the Streisand effect, and linked back to my story about the Streisand photo. And then somehow, I have no idea how, that caught on. I didn't do much. I mean, I may have mentioned it again a few times, but people picked up on it, and it took on a life of its own, and most of which I had nothing to do with.
And I think it's ironic that despite the term's fame, it has not brought more attention to the actual providence of the term. But now it has. Now we have the Better Offline, not even remotely exclusive. You probably told this story at dinner parties for years.
I may have told it a few times, yes.
It's a great story, though. So talking about old websites, Techdirt. So it's coming up on 30 years of running this site.
Yeah.
What has changed? Because the design hasn't. And I don't know if they say that negatively. I actually love the fact that it loads properly. There's not like some insane iframe situation.
Yeah.
My phone isn't 700 degrees because I'm looking at it.
Well, yes. The site has changed a few times, but it has not changed in a long time. So this is probably the third generation of Techdirt, but I think it hasn't really changed much since probably 2006, 2007. It's probably the last time we did a major overhaul of the look and feel of the site. I mean, look, I wanted to write about the technology industry and what was going on, and I was very interested in it. And I started when I was in business school, and I originally started writing. I was old school. I was writing an email newsletter before email newsletters were
idea,
the rage. And then I thought, like, newsletters. Who reads newsletters? I got to turn this into a website. And so
so just so we're clear, it was entirely email based. There was no web front.
Yeah. When it started.
Oh, baby.
When it started in 1997, it was entirely an email thing. And then I turned into a website about 6 months after the email. And originally it was just hosting the copies of the email newsletter. And then I started to build it out. And then what caught my attention around sometime in 1998, I first saw Slashdot. And this is before the word blog existed. And I was like, oh, this format and this setup is really cool. I wonder if I could do that and turn the website into that. And so I used /code 0.3. This was before they had released an official /code, but they still offered it up.
What do you mean a /code for those of us who don't know, like me?
/code was their software that they used that was Slashdot. It was they decided to release. They had God, what's his name? Rob Malda was the guy who created Slashdot, and he released the code. He had written one of the first sort of blogging type software products. And it was very messy, and it took me, and less me, but more a friend of mine who was willing to get in and deal with the mess of code, which was not easy. It took us 2 or 3 months to figure out how to actually get it to set up. And then suddenly, like, I could blog, and suddenly I could write easily every day rather than what I was doing originally, which was like hand coding HTML files and FTPing them to the server.
And this was before you could just spin up easy blogs like on HostGator and the like.
Like none of that stuff existed. Again, the word blog didn't even exist.
Where did you host it?
So I'm not going to say, actually. I had found a hosting company, and I still do some work with that hosting company. And we used to advertise. I mean, it can be found if people are looking, but because we occasionally, and Techdirt is no longer hosted with them, but we still host some other stuff with them because they've been amazing partners. And I just found them completely randomly through probably searching Yahoo, and found a random little tiny hosting company. But because we sometimes receive very angry legal threats, and sometimes those legal threats try and go upstream, our partner hosting company was receiving too many legal threats and said, "Hey, could you not mention that you host with us?"
Yeah, could you little Streisand effect? No, that's not.
Yeah, I mean it's not. But I mean, they're like great guys. Very small company, a tiny company.
And that's who you should work with.
Yeah.
I like for the smaller ones. I used to work with a very small domain hosting company, then got bought by a big one, and then it became shit almost immediately. I'm not going to name them as their remarkably litigious too.
And so, but this was not, they were great. And in fact, like, as I said, like we still use them for certain projects. And I trust those guys to be absolutely amazing. But yeah, so we just found a small hosting company, and they were the original host of Techdirt for a very long time.
Right.
And so, and eventually the word blog came about afterwards, and I resisted calling Techdirt a blog for a really long time. And then eventually kind of realized it is. So
did you finish business school?
I did finish business school. I have an MBA, and I because I started when I was in business school, I got my MBA, I moved out to California, and I started working for, I interned at Intel, and did my big tech, at the time, company experience for a little bit. I went to an e-commerce startup that was very big, for about a week and a half, and I joined, like a week after that. And so got to ride the e-commerce startup down a very big slope, constantly downward, for about a year. During this was pre the burst of the .com bubble.
So what year-ish?
I was there from 98 to 99.
Oh, prime, the good years.
Yeah, except for us, right? So I mean, part of the issue was we saw one of our competitors, go public based on, I don't know, nonsense and a PowerPoint. It was
before Sarbanes-Oxley, right?
Yeah. This was pre Sarbanes-Oxley, and so we decided that we had to go public too, and we had bankers, and consultants and all this nonsense, and they looked at what we had and they said, you can't go public. Like that's how bad our situation was. Everybody was going public with zero revenue, and we couldn't.
That is.
We had problems.
You might say that. So after that, did you go pro with Techdirt? Did you go full time?
So I quit. There was a couple of reasons why. I don't need to go into all the history there, but I eventually did a nice little quitting, and I sort of cast around, and I sort of was thinking of doing another startup myself, and then like a whole bunch of people were like, but the whole time, even when I was at this company, I was working on Techdirt on the side, and it was just sort of like, especially as everything was going terrible at that company, it was kind of my release where I could write about all the shit that's going down.
It's quite literally what I did in the start of my newsletter was because I was depressed due to professional and personal things. I was like, I need to do something else.
Yep. Yeah, totally. And so like, that's what I was doing. And then I was like casting about for an idea. I was working with some friends, and I was like, maybe we should do a startup, and we were talking about different ideas. And then a couple people were like, dude, you seem to really like doing this writing thing. Yeah. And like Techdirt is, it seems good. And like, maybe you could turn that into a company. And so, so a few months later I sort of said, okay, I'm going to commit to this full time.
And was it just you for a while, or how long?
Yeah, well, the history is like, there was someone else there in the very early years who sort of was helping me out, and we were trying to get it. He was not full time, and we were trying to get him to the point that it was full time, and that never worked out. And then, but soon after that, brought on basically a small group of people who were, we referred to as co-founders now, and sort of helped me out, helping me sort of build it out.
And how many people have you got now?
We are very small. We are now four people.
Cool. And one of those is Carl Bode as well.
Yeah.
The goat.
Bodie. His last name is
Bodie. Sorry.
Bodie.
Carl's going to kick my ass.
It's fine.
In the quote tweets.
He is used to it. But so Carl's been writing for us for a long time. I had him write for us at one point. I think he did me a favor. I mean, where I can't remember if either I got married or I had paternity leave, and I needed someone to help write, and he came in for a couple of weeks, and then later on when we were able to bring him on more.
So how are you feeling about the tech media? Because I say this with the reason I brought you on is to also publicly say you're fucking awesome and Techdirt is great, and I've been reading it for my entire career, and it feels like one of the only outlets that has not changed tonally.
Yeah.
Like you've been consistently, I think you're one of the other people who gets called like acerbic, like I do, which I always get pissed off with, which I guess doesn't help.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of weird. Like I actually don't care too much what people think about me or say about me. So like none of that has ever concerned me that much. But yeah, I don't know. Caustic, I think, is a term that's been used.
Fighty.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like you're fighty. It feels like you just are pissed off that people aren't more consistent and honest and upfront with stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just like, I have opinions and this is a chance to express them. I'm not going to hold back. And, it's like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people, I mean, obviously, like if you're working for like a big media company, there are limits put on kind of what you can say, but also it feels like a lot of people who sort of get into writing also, they kind of do it to then like move into a role. Like they want to get hired by, I don't know, CNN, NBC or something like that. And that was like never my goal. So like,
right.
I never had this concern that like, oh, like, well, if I write this, nobody's ever going to hire me because I'm not trying to get hired that way. So that was never a concern of mine.
But it feels tonally like you at least had a mission though.
Yeah,
I've always been trying to get hold of what that is in the best way.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I don't know. I mean, I have at some point I need to dig up and find like, and I know I like sent this to Carl and other people when we brought on new writers, I had sort of like a editorial, like, here's our mission, right? Here's what we're trying to do. But it's like 20 years old at this point, and I haven't looked at it, and I don't even know where I would find it. But like, my take on it was always like, the key thing for me with Techdirt is I actually, and this is where like potentially, I don't know if I disagree with you, or you might disagree with me, whereas like I am weirdly optimistic about technology. I actually do think technology is like a generally good driving force, and like
I actually fully agree, by the way.
Okay. And like innovation has all this amazing opportunity that I would love to see realized.
Thank you.
Like my focus is on like anything that gets in the way of it. And so like, and I want to be really careful here because like there's the Mark Andreessen view who says something that sounds kind of like what I'm saying here. Right. But he's not an optimist. He mentions Nick Land. Yeah. That's not the Dark Enlightenment guys are not optimists. Right. And so his whole thing is like, this accelerationist approach to like technology and innovation. And my take on it is more like, I want to see all of these, like all of the good stuff that technology enables to become reality. I would like to see it sooner because I only have so long to live, and the more of it that I can see and the more of it that will be available to my kids and everybody else, I think would be good. But that, there are ways to do that right, and there are ways to do it better, and to take a long-term view of how do we actually make the world better with these kinds of innovations. And so I think, poorly executed innovation is bad and leads to problems. And so where I get upset is sort of, and what sets me off on various rants is like, efforts that get in the way of good innovation, right? So it's not like the Andreessen viewpoint is like anything that gets in the way of any innovation is a problem, and
also the thing is, I fully agree with you. Like I regularly get told I'm a cynic or I'm a pessimist. I don't like this stuff. I love the computer.
Yeah,
it's the only reason I'm a person. Like I'm like the drill crying tweet, but about the internet. Yes. Like my job, my friend, loved ones, lovers, crying, and internet. And it's, now get the fuck out of my office, which is the quote from the drill tweet. I'm not saying this to Mike, but it's like, I agree with you. It's, these things may seem like we're deeply interrogating them and attacking them, but it's like these things are in the way of cool stuff happening.
Yes. Yeah.
Centralization, monopolization, shitty regulations that stop actual innovation happening are the things that will stop cool stuff happening.
Yes.
And I think too regularly people kind of conflate that with hating, but it's like you should hate the stuff that gets in the way of the cool stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Then yes, that is very much my view of these things. I mean, I would love to see more cool stuff, and so stuff that gets in the way of that I find problematic.
So my many complainers and haters, they hate me so much. They tell me I never like anything. But I want to talk about Bluesky.
Okay.
Who you joined the board of.
Yes.
So how did that actually come about?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how much you know about the history of Bluesky itself.
I think it would be good to tell the listeners.
Sure. So I have some association with it, though it's sort of semi-random, which was that, when this goes back to I think it was I had looked this up fairly recently, so don't hold me to the dates, but I think it was around 2014 or so, was when there was suddenly some controversies around the way that Twitter and Reddit were handling certain content moderation controversies. And there was, basically really bad, shitty content on both of those platforms. And there was a big debate over whether or not those companies should step in and take down that content, and whether or not that was an attack on free speech or blah, blah, blah. We've heard all the debates, but that was really the first one that really boiled through was around 2014. And among the other things that I believe in, strongly is free speech is a very important concept to me. And again, I always feel like now I need to caveat that, because most people who say that they support free speech
they support saying the N-word.
Yeah.
That is their big goal.
Yeah. It's very frustrating to me. I support actual free speech.
Yes.
And that includes, the right of private platforms to say, we don't want to associate with you.
Right.
That is a right of association, which is considered one part of the right of free speech. But at the same time, I do appreciate, again, the power of the internet itself, to be this platform of enabling more good speech. Some bad speech, obviously, but also an awful lot of really, really good speech. And I am very, very concerned about an overreaction where, in an attempt to stop the bad speech, which again is very much there, that we throw out a whole bunch of really good and important speech. Can
you give an example just to, because this is a thorny topic, I think it's good to have.
Sure. I mean, obviously, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, these kinds of things came about because of the internet. The Arab Spring is another one where the internet was incredibly powerful in having these voices be able to speak out and to form groups and organize and talk to each other. That really was not particularly possible prior to the internet being there and enabling that kind of speech. And I worry when we talk about stopping certain kinds of speech that would enable people to stop these other kinds of good speech. And so that was sort of larger issue. I'm sort of thinking about how do we protect, the ability for people to speak out, to speak truth to power in certain cases where it is really important. Also protect the right of private, services to say, I don't want to associate with this content, not be forced to host, Nazi content, for example, or hateful content. How do we sort of balance those things? And because I'm old and because I'm from, I existed on the internet in the 90s, and I felt like the internet was kind of different back then.
Right.
And so I just started thinking through these things, and I said, well, wait, how did we get to this world in which, I grew up pre-World Wide Web on Usenet and IRC and all of these,
I was a Polaris man, if you remember Polaris IRC.
I don't think
it was a great side client, had colors and shit. It was beautiful.
Okay. I don't even remember what IRC client I used.
I'll never forget it.
But, and I used Gopher before the web existed. Like, I don't know if you remember Gopher.
I don't know Gopher. I'm looking it up now.
Okay. It was sort of like a text-based, menu system. So
Gopher protocol, Jesus.
Yes. Yeah. So I would get the weather every morning by gophering to a server and finding out what the weather was. So I was like, we had all these things and they were all protocol based, and then anyone could build, right? So you used a different IRC client than I did. Anyone could build on it because it was all a protocol and anyone could build. And I was like, wait, the world changed somewhere in the last 20 years. And now we have all of these services that are wholly owned corporations, and they obviously have their own interests. And that doesn't seem like a great world. So I wrote a blog post that just kind of suggested like, hey, why aren't these things built on protocols? Why are they all wholly owned corporations? Because that's where it seems like a whole bunch of the problems come in. And then
these aren't interoperable portals in general.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like, because once, I was thinking back to Usenet, honestly, where it's like, yeah, you had bad, terrible people on Usenet.
Such bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I mean, depending on where you go, it's kind of risky. But you also had like kill files, and you had different Usenet servers that would ban different groups, different.
Some of the early gaming groups I was in.
Yeah.
Like I was playing UO.
Yeah. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff, but like you had methods of dealing with it, but it was like community based. It wasn't like the president of Usenet has to decide which things are allowed and which are not. But like as a community, we can sort of figure out, or through individuals, like with kill files and stuff, like you could say like, I never want to hear from Ed again. Right. So like, I'm going to make sure that I never have to deal with him. And so, and I was like, that was like a better world. Whereas now, like everything, because like Reddit is fully in control of Reddit and Twitter is fully in control of Twitter, we're in this world where we are totally dependent on the decisions that they make. Right. And, like, yes, there is like one decider. And so like in some cases, maybe that is useful, but, on the whole, it feels like a less great world because the incentives that they have are also, not always aligned with the users, and certainly not aligned with like, what might be best for different users. It's always going to be a single view, and usually it's like what is going to be the biggest profit, for us.
Right.
And so I wrote this piece sort of like theorizing, like what would it look like if we had a more interoperable, protocol-based world for these kinds of services. And then I'd written a few more things about it. And at some point in like 2018, the Knight Institute of Columbia asked if I would write a paper kind of outlining that idea. And that made me really sit down and sort of think through it more systematically. And I wrote this paper called Protocols, Not Platforms, which I was, went back and forth with them on editing. There were two folks at the Knight Institute who were really, really good, like amazing editors, like really challenged everything I wrote. And I was just like, but how would this work? Like, why would that, and really made me, work hard at getting that paper right. And they published that in 2019, and it got a little bit of attention early on, and then it sort of died out. And then Jack Dorsey found the paper. And I kind of think I know how he did it, but I'm not entirely sure. And he reached out and he was just like, hey, I read your paper. And I think we want to do that with Twitter. And,
right.
And so to take one step back, like my thought in writing that paper to create that world. So I was sort of arguing that this world is a better world where it is decentralized.
And so every major
protocols.
Platform would have a protocol that could be connected to the other.
Or, yeah, I mean, there are a few different ways that it could be done. But basically, I was like, what can we do to like take away the power of like a Mark Zuckerberg or, a Sergey Brin or whatever to like control a huge portion of the internet was kind of the underlying thinking, but still have the benefits of these services, right? Like, like there are good things, but, the problem comes in when, one, you're sort of stuck there, right? If you, like the example, and I use this in the paper and it comes up a lot, is like the email example where, compared to like Facebook, right? If I leave Facebook, and I mostly have, but when I leave Facebook, that means my family that uses Facebook, my cousins, my aunts and uncles that all stay in touch through Facebook, I no longer know what's going on with them because I don't want to deal with Facebook anymore. But email, like if I don't like my email provider, I can find a new email provider and I don't lose touch with everyone that I email because I can just import my address book over. So I said, why can't we make all of the internet services that we like more like the email example and less like the Facebook example? Where if I leave, I can still stay in touch with people.
Where's the incentive for the platforms to do this?
So if you read the Protocols Not Platforms paper, you see like I tried to come up with a bunch of incentives to effectively convince the companies to recognize that there are potential benefits. Yes, obviously they are losing control, but my main pitch to them, and this is the one that Jack seemed to buy, was you also don't get blamed for everything anymore. And so whether or not that is a good thing or not, I was just like, because
and the downside, just so that I'm clear, the downside is for them would be that they can no longer trap you there. But in return, you're not totally at fault.
Well, basically, it's like when, so this is not a perfect analogy, but it's like you think of email and spam, right? So everyone's sort of like trying to deal with spam, but at no point are they like calling the CEO of email to testify before Congress because there's spam everywhere, right? We sort of recognize that it is a collective action issue and it's a collective problem that everyone has to try to work on in different ways. And you had, early on at least, you had different people sort of creating different spam fighting tools. And the discussion was over that. Like, how do we better handle those things rather than, you, Mr. CEO of email, have to fix this?
I think where I'm a little confused, but forgive me for this, is that how does this deal with like trolls and spam and all that? If they have less responsibility, then who does? So if there was is this I guess federated? Is this what you're suggesting? Like the kind, or is this? Forgive my ignorance here.
No. It's not. It's a little bit complex to wrap your head around. It's complex for me to wrap my head around it, and so it's fine. It's important. It's good to ask questions. No, so my thinking was that what happens is if it's, and I didn't think of it as federated as in like Mastodon, right? I mean, we can get into like specific debates about the actual like technical infrastructure and how it's built. I don't think that's as important. The idea more was that if it is not wholly controlled by one company, those companies can still, have a responsibility in terms of keeping their part of it clean in order to keep users. Because now the way I looked at it was, so imagine a world in which there are lots of Twitters. And this is kind of the way I was thinking about it, that could all interoperate and communicate across each other. If Jack Dorsey, at that time, still running Twitter, does something really stupid or enables too many Nazis to be too Nazi-ful, then people will leave, right?
Right.
Because there's now easy exit under this kind of system. And therefore, he has incentives to actually keep things clean. Now, this is the part that some people get upset about, which is like, if it is a protocol, then you could still have, Nazi Twitter, which is kind of what we have now.
Which you can just say Twitter now.
Yeah, or X, right? So, but in that world, I think they can be much more isolated. Now, this is partly theoretical in my belief.
But also, you would be building a site on top of a protocol. It would use the protocol. Thus, you would be visiting a site.
Right. So you would still be using a site, and then but you would have more control yourself because you could bring in your own algorithms or other people's algorithms, or so and
use that to cordon off the Nazis rather than promote them
to cordon off the Nazis. But again, there are different layers here in terms of the stack, in terms of who's doing which part of it. But you could still have room for a company like a Twitter or now a Bluesky that has some moderation features. And if people really dislike the way that they're moderating, they could build their own.
On the same protocol with the same users, with the same accounts.
Right, exactly.
And that's what Bluesky is really doing. Like Bluesky is on top of a protocol, or is it a protocol itself?
No, so Bluesky is on top of a protocol, the AT protocol or AT protocol. And so, what happened was that Jack decided that Twitter would do this. He was somewhat convinced by my paper and decided that he would hire a small team of engineers, give them some money, and have them go and build a protocol, with the idea being that Twitter would adopt that protocol eventually. And so that was the plan that he sort of set in motion in late 2019. And he announced it on Twitter, and he gave a shout out to my paper, but I had no official anything. I had spoken to him after he read the paper. I had a couple conversations with him, and I got an alert the night before he sent out that thread saying he was going to do it. He was going to announce it. But I had no role or any association with it. And then COVID happened, which I think probably threw off timelines. But Twitter folks got a bunch of people who were interested in decentralized social media together in an online sort of chat space using Matrix, which is another decentralized protocol, and they basically talked about ideas for a really long time, and it took Twitter way too long, basically another year and a half, until they finally decided that they were going to hire somebody to lead the Bluesky project. And then that took a while, and they eventually hired Jay Graber. But again, Jay very smartly said this needs to be separate. It can't be a part of Twitter. It needs to be independent from Twitter.
Because otherwise someone could buy it and then ruin it.
Destroy it, yeah.
We wouldn't want that to happen.
Yeah, so pretty prescient on her part.
And so how did you end up on the board then? Because I was also in the thread, and like 100 people mentioned me. So, I mean, I have no qualifications. I post a lot. I don't really know stuff. So, I mean, it's unfair you got it, but still.
So, I mean, basically, I'd known Jay. I'd known Jay from before all of this, actually. I had met with her kind of around when the protocols platforms.
This is Jay Graber, the CEO.
Jay Graber, who's the CEO. I had met with her kind of when the paper came out through a mutual friend. She had read the paper and liked it, and we had lunch. And just very quickly, like I realized, like she internalized it. She understood it better than I did, and she understood my paper better than I did, and I wrote it. And that was like, I was like, wow, that
rocks. As far as the CEO of a website actually knowing how it works, I'm not even being sarcastic here.
No, I mean, rocks. it was really eye opening, and this is obviously before Bluesky existed. And then so she once Twitter announced Bluesky, she had made it clear to them that she really wanted to run it, and Jack and Twitter like really took a lot of time to actually realize that like she should run it, and like they interviewed a lot of other people. They actually, again, I had no official association. I never got paid. I never had no contract or anything. But they actually had me interview people who might run the Bluesky project at one point.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I was just they just asked me, and I said sure, and then I gave them feedback. And I recommended that they hire Jay, though there were really good other people.
So there was a board of people setting up Bluesky, just so that people know, the organization. So there was a board of people.
It was mostly Twitter people. There were a few outsiders, but it was mostly like senior executives at Twitter. And
they were still at Twitter at the time, and then they left, or?
And no. Oh, in terms of the people they interviewed? Yeah, none of the people they interviewed were at Twitter. Sorry. All the people that they interviewed, the people who were doing like the interviewing were Twitter people.
Right.
And a couple outside people like me and a few others.
That's really cool though.
Yeah. And then they it was actually some really impressive candidates. And like, I was kind of blown away by like how many smart people were thinking through, how do you actually build a decentralized social media protocol? And then eventually they hired Jay, and she set it up as an independent operation, and then built out the company. And the originally had, so the board was herself, Jeremy Miller, who is still on the board and was has a lot of experience in decentralized protocols and standards. And then Jack was the third board member. And in the midst of all of this as well, then Elon came along, obviously. I think your listeners know what happened.
Might have heard of him.
Yeah. And everything.
He's the Zip2 founder, if you haven't.
Yes. It's funny, if you go way back in the Techdirt archives, I have a post about Zip2 where I called him Elton Musk at the time, which I've never corrected. And so yeah, Jack was on the board, but somewhere around this time when Elon took over, Jack discovered Nostr, which is this other decentralized social media protocol, and he became really, really interested in it. And this is actually about the last time I spoke with Jack, where he was like, "Oh, you should check out Nostr. Like, it is everything that your paper, that your paper described." And I was like, "Okay, that's interesting." And I was like, "But what about Bluesky? Like, aren't you doing Bluesky
on the board of that?
And you're on the board." And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "They're too slow. Nostr is going to move much faster."
Okay, buddy.
Yeah.
How's Nostr doing?
Yeah. So, like, I checked it out. I actually do think there are some really cool things about Nostr.
Oh, I'm sure.
And like, technically, it's a really interesting setup. That he's right that it does enable like a lot of like really some really cool things can be done via Nostr. And it is interesting because both the technological underpinnings of both Nostr and the at protocol, which is what Bluesky is based on, both really come out of this other decentralized protocol called Secure Scuttlebutt, which we're not going to get into and what that is and what happened to it. But so both of them take some of the technological thinkings from the same core idea. And that's actually kind of interesting. And, if you get into the technical weeds, it's kind of neat how there are some similarities there, but he got really focused on it mainly because it was like so lightweight and so simple that people could build on it very quickly. Whereas Bluesky was taking more time. But part of the reason why Bluesky was taking more time, and part of the reason why I've always been really impressed by Jay, is that her approach to all of this is like, some people care about decentralization. Most people don't. Right. And if you're going to build a thing that works, like the fact that it is a decentralized protocol underneath shouldn't matter to most users. They need to build just a good service up front. Like that's the most important thing. And so, Jay's very, very conscientious of that and thoughtful of that. And so anyway, so that all happened. Jack was still on the board, and then at some point he was doing an interview and was sort of confronted about something, and he was like, "Oh, I'm quitting the board," and so he quit the board, and suddenly there was an empty seat on the Bluesky board, and then yes, lots of names were thrown out in big threads on Bluesky of potential replacements.
Very unfair.
But I mean, I had been in sort of regular contact with Jay, ever since Bluesky started, and there were different points where different things popped up, and she had reached out to me for thoughts and advice, and I'd had a few phone calls with her, over the time. And so basically, like, I think she had reached out because she wanted some advice on something. And again, this is all totally informal. I had no official relationship or anything. And we started talking, and I tossed out the idea. I was like, I know Jack left. If you want me to help find you someone else, I am willing to like evaluate other people. But also like, if you're interested in potentially having me be that person, I'm also interested in that. And so that's basically what I said. And we continued that conversation over the course of about 2 months. And I spoke to Jeremy, who's the other board member, and some other folks as well. And then eventually, they offered me that spot.
Cool.
So that's the basic story.
To wrap us up, I will ask you the question I love to ask people, which is, why should we have hope right now? Because there's so much depression. I'm not talking about politics. I'm just talking about within the tech industry, there's so much shit. There's so much grim shit. What gives you hope right now?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, stuff like Bluesky. And I will broaden that to say like all of the attempts at building new decentralized systems, I find super exciting and encouraging, because it's showing that we can build that world where it's like we can look at, the success of social media as a concept is really interesting, and it's cool. Like, it has allowed so many people to connect. And yes, there are all sorts of downsides. Like, again,
of course,
not denying what we know are the downsides of social media, but like the number of important friendships and business contacts and relationships that I've built through social media, and this concept of people being able to communicate with each other so easily is such a powerful thing that I think a lot of people take for granted. And yes, what happened was that all sort of got locked in these enshittified silos from these, giant companies run by often terrible people, and with very misguided incentives. The thing that I am really enthusiastic about with decentralized social media is that we have a chance to do it again, and we have a chance to hopefully do it better. And this is something that I didn't really talk about when in my thinking on the paper. And this is something that comes up, and I think it is worth addressing, is that some people say, well, Bluesky is a company, it is venture funded, it's got to go down that same route of enshittification. And that is a fear. And I sort of view part of my role on the board as being like stopping the enshittification and sort of representing the best, the best position of the community. But another thing that has impressed me about Bluesky and Jay is that they have within their mission this idea that the future company is a potential adversary, right? Everybody knows what happened with Twitter.
Right.
And so they are building the protocol to be resistant to that. That doesn't mean it won't happen, but it is being done in a way that is much more difficult for them to enshittify. And again, like I go back to the email example,
right. Keep going.
Where, most people have a Gmail account. Like lots of people use Gmail, and some people can argue like Gmail's not great, but I don't think Gmail has been as enshittified as other systems because it's
built on email.
Because it's built on basic email protocols, SMTP and whatnot. And so if they make it really horrible, if they were really like, there were concerns, early on, Google's going to spy on all your email and do advertising off of it and all this kind of stuff. They sometimes make experiments in that way, and then they get, smacked down and stuff, because as soon as they go down this path of really making it horrible, it's so much, it just opens up the opportunity for somebody to step in and say, well, it's easy. Like you can switch, you don't lose contact with anyone, right? It's hard to leave Facebook. It's easier to leave Gmail. And so the incentive structure then is for Google not to fuck up Gmail. That's not to say, Gmail has its problems, but I think it's less enshittified than other services. Whereas, and Bluesky and the way they're designing Bluesky and AT protocol, it is designed to make it, really difficult for future Bluesky to enshittify the service. Because if they do, all of the pieces are set up that somebody else can come in and create, new Bluesky, green sky, whatever you want to call it, that everybody can just shift to with the push of a button. And Bluesky loses everything that they have as a company. And so the real challenge now is like, can we build, a sustainable business and service on that without making it awful for the users and the community on that service? But we've built in this sort of commitment mechanism, which is if we try and do things that is exploiting our users, which is like, that's where the enshittification curve starts. You reach this point where instead of providing value, we now have to extract value.
You've trapped them. Now they cannot be.
Right. And so, with Bluesky, the whole point is like, we're setting it up as, not me, them, but, I'm on the board.
Watching.
So I'm watching. They're setting it up in a way that they're setting a trap for themselves that says if we try and start extracting value in a way that is awful to people, they can leave and they can destroy our business. And therefore, we can't do that. We have to build a service that is good for the community and that, provides value for the community rather than is extracting value from the community. And so that, who knows if it'll work? It is, a lot of this is theoretical, but, I think everything that they've done so far has been in that right. They make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but I think they're moving in the right direction with it. And that has me really, really optimistic, because wouldn't it be great if we could have like all of these benefits that we're talking about without the awfulness and without, it all being dependent on some billionaire who's, trying to buy up an island in Hawaii or whatever.
Okay, so maybe I have one more question.
Okay.
What is the mechanism to stop Bluesky and shitifying then?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the fact that anyone can every part of Bluesky itself can be recreated elsewhere while still allowing you to communicate with people on Bluesky.
Right.
So it is possible to entirely remove yourself from Bluesky and still communicate with anyone else on Bluesky.
Huh.
And so
that's how it should be.
Yes, right? And so if Bluesky shitifies and does bad stuff, then somebody else is going to come along and say like, I don't like this. Like, so just for example, right. If they decide to, start inserting, terrible ads everywhere or whatever, then it's like somebody comes along and says, well, I'm going to build the infrastructure that is Bluesky without the ads. And
they would have access to all the posts, all the users.
Right. And Bluesky can't do anything to stop that.
That's really cool. That is a better future. But Bluesky can keep users by not being shit.
Exactly. And so, there is the challenge of like, it still is a company. It is a public benefit company. So we are allowed as a board, like, the fiduciary duty is to a wider set of stakeholders, including the community, not just the investors. And we can do that legally because of the public benefit corporation. But like, we have this technical infrastructure that says, we basically shoot ourselves in the foot if we make it shit for the community. And now the trick is like, can you build a real sustainable business on top of that by actually providing value? And that's hopefully the next stage of what the company is working on.
Mike, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you?
Thanks for having me. This was a really fun conversation. Yeah. I wasn't sure where it was going to go, but that was good.
That's the Better Offline experience.
So I am obviously on Bluesky. M Masnick it's at mmasnick.bsky.social. Is my account there. It's easy to find me on Bluesky. Obviously at Techdirt, and those are the main things. So if you want to read my articles, read them on Techdirt. If you want to see me, ranting about this or that at any point, find me on Bluesky.
Thanks so much, and you will now get the soon-to-be updated Better Offline links following this. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Better Offline. The editor and composer of the Better Offline theme song is Matt Osowski. You can check out more of his music and audio projects at mattosowski.com, mattosowski.com. You can email me at easy@betteroffline.com or visit betteroffline.com to find more podcast links and, of course, my newsletter. I also really recommend you go to chat.wheresyouרד.at to visit the Discord and go to r/betteroffline to check out our Reddit. Thank you so much for listening.
Better Offline is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.